And that closing that loop is very, very key. Most companies do the first part but don't close the loop on did we really do that or not. And once you do that multiple times, what you are making the case works because you have proved it. And that creates a flywheel. What is time tested? I don't know if anything is time tested in the new world. So I almost remind myself and our company and our team and other founders also, like, what worked in the past, is not necessarily time tested in what will work now in the new world of AI. Satya said, like, SaaS, people won't buy SaaS anymore because they can build their own SaaS. I don't buy into that at all. I think that doesn't make any sense to me. This thing of like, now they have AI to build code, so they can just build their own CRM and HR and all kind of things. I don't think so. I would imagine the world that most companies have two AIs. One AI is to go and build the software. Second AI is make sure the software works.
Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us on the Unpacked Pod. Before today's episode, I want to thank Stifel Bank for sponsoring the show. For Jyoti Capital's fund banking and my own personal wealth management, Stifel is our trusted partner. Now, on to the show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Unpack Podcast, the podcast for operators, by operators. I'm your co-host Vignesh, and I'm a partner at Sierra Ventures.
Hey everybody, I'm Arvind, the other co-host for the podcast and partner at Jyoti Capital. And today again, we have a phenomenal guest, none other than Jyoti Bansal, who is in rarefied air, obviously, and we will probably dig into how it came to be, but the sticker price there was 3.7 billion sort of acquisition price for AppDynamics, his former company, sold to Cisco. And he has continued to build on multiple other ventures, and we're going to debate a lot about that and his view on how AI is evolving. So first and foremost, let me extend a warm welcome to Jyoti. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you for having me here. Excited about the conversation.
Yeah, and we always thank you again, and we always like to kick off learning a bit about the person's journey to date, right? And specifically formative years, how sort of led to you building a very consequential company, and of course that sets the tone maybe to what you're building right now. So please give the audience a bit of a peek into the past and then bring us to the present.
Yeah. How far back do you want me to go?
Well, wherever you found the inspiration.
I'll start with So I grew up in India, in a small town in India. Went to study computer science at IIT Delhi, one of the engineering schools. Growing up, for me, I didn't really know much about tech and software, and but a lot of my family had mom and pop businesses. My dad had a mom and pop shop, so you kind of learn about business. I learned more business before I went to study computer science. So I kind of normally many times you start with you start as an engineer and then you learn business. I feel like I was learning business as a kid because just what works in your around the in the family, what doesn't work, all of that stuff. Then I became studied computer science, became a software engineer. So I had this kind of a bit of a thing going that I wanted to get back into the business game as well and leverage everything that I do. The power of software and what we can do with software engineering. So I came to Silicon Valley. That's where I wanted to be. I came on H-1B visa. I know there's a lot of debate on H-1B visa, and I think it's as an American now, I do think we need to continue to attract folks to come here and start building their careers here. The way I came here. I worked in a few startups in Silicon Valley. I was not allowed to start my own company when I was an H-1B, which is also another challenge. I worked in a few startups. Different degrees of success. You learn from those startups, what works, what doesn't work, and at some point, I was from a I was close to getting my green card, and you kind of when you're allowed to start your things. I wanted to solve the problems on that. I saw myself as a developer quite a lot, which is something goes wrong in the code. How do you fix it? And the whole world running on code, and you can't fix the problem fast. That's a problem, and that was the genesis of AppDynamics. I started from engineer to a first time founder. AppDynamics, as you said, the we are about to go IPO in 2017, and a few days before the IPO, we had an acquisition offer. We decided to sell the company. And then kind of for me, the number one question people ask me, like, why do you start a second company after that or a third company after that and all? It's like I tried to retire. I did really try to retire after that. I retired for like 6, 7, 8 months, and then it's like, okay, that's not for me. Like, I enjoy what I do, which is building companies, building products, competing in the market, creating organizations, teams. That's what I enjoy. So why won't I do that again? And that's what I've been doing. That's my
Just
journey.
out of curiosity, I think you had a bucket list that you were trying to hit after AppD. What was the favorite moment of the bucket list?
It's still safaris in Africa. I was never been there before. Like, my bucket list had like, okay, I want to do safari in Africa. I want to trek in the Himalayas. I wanted to hike to Machu Picchu. I want to see the fjords in Norway. And it really took 6 months to do all of that. But yes, my favorite is still the safaris in Africa.
Hey, one maybe just to jump right into it, Jyoti. Between AppDynamics and Harness and what you're doing now, I always found one of the interesting stories of it's kind of the bittersweet end, I guess, in the way you described it at AppD to going into Harness. And would love to hear kind of what were the lessons that you learned, and really from the perspective of as you think about building Harness big and for the long run. How did you kind of rethink about how did you rethink the business? What were the big lessons that you learned as you started the company that founders listening to the podcast can take away as they start their own companies?
Well, I'll start with the lessons that I learned that app dynamics that worked. And to me, the number one starts with a market size that's big, and you are constantly making it bigger on what you can address. So in app dynamics, we started with like one part of the observability stack, application monitoring for Java applications. But every year, every 18 months, we're expanding it to a broader observability platform. And it was very clear, and it took me some time in there, like, that in many of these spaces the platform becomes the moat, and platform is what would win in the end. And you have to go about it systematically. Platform expands your TAM, and platform expands your moat as well. So that was definitely one lesson at AppDynamics we did well. And I'll talk about at Harness how we do it even better than what we're doing at AppDynamics. The second lesson to me was like, that the products are not enough by themselves. The go to market is as important or even more important as the company scales. You can product can take you to a certain level, but unless you really master go to market as an organization, your scale will be constrained. So that's something I learned the hard way at AppDynamics. It took me some time. As a first time founder with a product technical background, I didn't really appreciate that in the beginning. To me, it's like, if I build a great product, say, why worry about sales? And then I hit like about 8-10 million revenue in AppDynamics, and just things were not scaling. And then you realize like you gotta to scale, you really need to get go to market working. So that's definitely another lesson that at Harness we follow. The third is around I would say it's a culture of constant re-innovation or reinvention of yourself or who you are and what you need to do. Because things are changing so fast. And the space that I am in, developer tools, AppDynamics was in, and Harness is in, the change velocity is extremely high. Like a lot of things happening around you all the time. So you have to build an organization that is nimble and adaptable to what's happening. And that in the end, I almost feel like becomes the longest company mode in the for building an organization for the long term. So those are the lessons I learned at AppDynamics that I bring. And I learned lessons, some things what not to do also, like of like right investor alignment, board alignment. We had issues at AppDynamics on that. It slows you down, and like it makes it harder to execute and operate at the scale. Like some investors want to go big and build a good big platform. Some investors want to go small and not do that, and like are very conservative, and there is a lack of the right alignment, and those things make it challenging to execute at some level, right? So when I the second time founder, you have the foresight of what worked well, but also like some of the challenges that I saw that that I try to avoid.
I think that last point is super, super important, especially in this AI world with all the high valuations and how things are going. I think the valuation in some ways sets the expectation, but I think the founder themselves has to be aligned and know what they're signing up for in the journey. But I want to go back to point number two, because I think to me, as we meet with a lot of technical founders, especially, Um, I, I think they do a lot of work. Most founders do on just customer discovery and talking to the right folks and at least discovering the problem. But when you talk about really setting up the company for success from a distribution perspective, are there things that you did earlier on at Harness that you didn't do at AppDynamics that really helped you achieve scale and achieve scale faster?
Yeah, I would say the thing that we learned at AppDynamics was that when you are selling into larger enterprises, where some of these problems are big problems, and you need to learn in your sales process how to justify value. So it's not just problem discovery. It's not about problem, your solution validation. If you look at like what you do in a product market fit, look at, okay, is there's a real problem, you validating that. Does my solutions solving it? That's the second part. But there's a third part, which is, can you systematically justify the value of solving the problem with your solution? And that is very, very core to scaling a go-to-market organization. Like, how can a salesperson prove it out? How can you prove it out? As a company, that if you do this, you're gonna save $1 million, or you're gonna save $2 million, or whatever it is, and it's justifiable, is provable, is it's and you validate it after the sale as well, that process. So that's something we learned at AppDynamics, and at Harness we implemented it early on. We call it like a business value assessment when that's happening, in the sales process, but also a business value validation that's happening after in the post sales process. So we sold our software to someone, and we said, you're going to save $1 million, and you made the justification, and people did a proof of concept around it and bought us. 6 months later, are they on track to do that? Are they really getting that value? And that closing that loop is very, very key. Most companies do the first part but don't close the loop on did we really do that or not. And once you do that multiple times, like what you are making the case works because you have proved it. And that creates a flywheel. And that's something like at Harness we did early on, and we did better for sure.
Yeah. Maybe a two-pronged question still on go-to-market. It's a favorite topic. One is, you have built as one great company with a great outcome and another on the way to building a great company. Is what is time tested, Jyoti? What is time tested from a go-to-market point of view, that audience that might be building an AI native now kind of company trying to sell into the enterprise? You
Mhm.
think it still remains true, rings true? I think one of your
Yeah.
aspect about the closing the loop on the value accrued, I
Mhm.
think that's a critical one. But is there anything else?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, what is time tested? I don't know if anything is time tested in the in the new world. So I almost like remind myself and our company and our team and other founders also, like, what worked in the past, is not necessarily time tested in what will work now
Mm.
in the new world of AI. So yes, we can get some lessons from it, but those lessons, may not be the like, oh, this has worked like 10 years ago, doesn't mean that might. I think the one of the things in the new AI world is a lot of consumption pricing.
Yeah.
Consumption has inherently value of proving that someone is using it and getting value from. Although this could be like wasteful thing as well, like, but so we I normally say, like, in the part of solving of, like, did we really deliver some value. If it's consumption based, sometimes there is it makes it easier, because people are not using it, if you didn't deliver value. So that's definitely something that changes. I think what doesn't change, I always feel, is proving that your product is going to make certain things better, and you run a process around convincing people on it. So now it's like, if you are going in a process where it's the decision makers are individual contributors, then you
Mm.
just give the product to them through a PLG kind of motion. If the otherwise you go, you have to go and run a sales process where you're going to a director, VP, level kind of folks, making convincing them on, like, why they should bring in something, how it will cut the cost for them. You have to justify them. They will bring but in ideal model, you want to do both, because it's
Mhm.
very rarely that you'll have one or the other, right? So, like, what I call it, like, now the sandwich model. Like, you go from the bottom to the practitioners, and you're giving them PLG and free access, and they start using it. But that's not enough if you want to convert it into like a $500,000, $1 million, $2 million deal for your product. You have to also go to the higher ups and make the business case to them in most of the time. So if you can create a go to market engine that combines both, that really works out well. uh,
Mm.
you know the in the AI world, like a lot of people haven't solved the gross margin part. Like the costs are high,
Yeah.
gross margins are a problem. So that's definitely is an element of like how you sell, how what cost you pass through. Everyone is figuring out some of that.
Yeah. You just stroked one more question in my head, and that was around outcomes based pricing. Do you think is Harness experimenting with some of that, or do you think what is the right setup for an outcome based pricing in your mind?
I love the outcome based pricing concept. Like and a lot of times people ask like, oh, people are moving from seat pricing to consumption. How you do it? Or at Harness, we were kind of fortunate that we are always doing it like that. We have a very small part of our revenue just like that seat based, like less than 5%. Mostly it's some kind of a consumption, and consumption is based on is really and some activity that you do in our product, which is really achieves an outcome. For example, our core product on CD, which is the CD part of CI/CD, that's we charge by how many deployments you do with us successfully, or how many services you are deploying with us successfully. So it becomes an outcome based, and it's been like that forever. Like if you don't use it to do successful deployments with us, what's you're not getting enough value. So that's been our pricing model for that. We have a FinOps product in Harness that's very popular. A part of that is based on how much savings we do get to you. So like if you don't get you savings on your cloud cost, we don't charge for that part. Those parts. So we have been doing many of the outcome based pricing concepts for some time, which really aligns with the value based selling that we like to do at Harness.
Jyoti, one other angle on this kind of call it effectively new style of selling. Look, at the end of the day, what you're talking about, a lot of this comes down to just being able to articulate the value effectively, and in some ways, the best sellers have always been able to do that and tell the right story. But I'm curious for you as you started Harness, and again thinking about this from the shoes of a founder that's building and scaling a go to market function. How did you figure out like what was the right profile, what was the right characteristics, like what did you get right maybe or get wrong at AppDynamics, lessons learned there, and then how did you correct for that when you started Harness from a early sales hiring perspective?
Yeah. So there are two parts. One is articulating the value. Second is proving the value. And sometimes people underestimate the proving the value part. Like a big part of the sales process is to prove the value. And you don't need to prove the entire value, but you do a portion of that and you prove it in a systematic way. And then after the sale, you prove it completely. And once you do that, then like 6 months later, 3 months later, when the implementations are done, that you prove the value again, like we really did it. That unlocks like now you're selling them product number two, product number three, product number four, maybe more things because they believe in you because you proved the value. So hiring is always hard. Like when at AppDynamics we started with like I don't know how to hire the best salespeople. I don't even know what a best salesperson even mean. So you hire some salespeople, and over time, and I realized like okay, the caliber and experience and of the salespeople makes a big difference. And especially when you're selling larger and larger deals and making this kind of a case. So we at AppDynamics we were hiring like some of the top sales talent. We got very good at that. AppDynamics was very well known for one of the best enterprise sales organizations as we grew it and scaled. So at Harness, when we started, I of course I had that experience and I know what the high bar is. But that said, actually, I realized, and through some hard, yeah, many times it feels like okay, from AppDynamics to Harness, everything will be straightforward, but not sometimes because you still have to learn a few things. And to the couple of sales reps I hired in the beginning, by the time they were very successful at AppDynamics at that time. They were coming from like AppDynamics was sold. They're looking for next thing. I'm AppDynamics founder, started the next company. They wanted to come and join me there. But AppDynamics, they were easily doing $1 million deals all the time, and they're very good at that. At that time, they were the top sales reps who would easily do those. Maybe even $5 million deals, $10 million deals with AppDynamics was selling at that scale at that time. They came to Harness when we were like zero revenue or like half a million revenue, and the deal size was 40K or 50K at most. And now it's like they were suddenly not the best reps. And so I kind of made that mistake of like and not like that they were the best reps, but they were not the right fit for who
That's
we were at that time. Like
Yep.
now Harness is bigger than AppDynamics was when we sold the company and when we were going IPO. And we are doing those large kind of deals all the time in enterprises. And those reps will be great reps now, but they were not when I started Harness, and I made a mistake of like trying to bring them. So you also have to look for who is the right person for what stage. What's your deal size? That's a big part of it. So what's your deal velocity? How long it takes to do the deal. If you're selling like $1 million, $2 million ARR kind of deals, you need a certain kind of reps, and you need a certain platform that's a product that's much wider to justify the price and the value that it can provide. If you're doing smaller deals, you need a different kind of rep, who's good in the high velocity kind of thing. So when I look at the profile, I normally look at high integrity reps, ability to learn fast, and they have high motive and motor of working hard and doing things. And then you look at like what they have sold before. The a good proxy of like, I always tell everyone is hire reps who have sold in your price range before. Like if you or that's what their strength is. If you're selling in 50K and you're hiring reps who are experienced in selling $1 million deal, it's probably won't work. But the inverse is true as well. If you're selling $1 million deals and you hire reps who only sold 50K deals, that won't work too.
And I think that conceptually makes perfect sense. I guess one nuance though is like, and a lot of times you get these misfires when it comes to hiring. And I think the hiring that first rep in any role, but since we're talking about sales here, keep it on sales. Like getting that first rep sometimes sets a tone and sets a culture for how that organization performs. Obviously, you as a former founder, you can course correct. I think you have a lot more authority and a lot more voice to be able to do it. But like, what happens if you do miss on the first hire? Like, how do you course correct? How do you make sure that you get yourself back on the right track?
Yeah. And that's a great point. Like course correction is very important, but sometimes you don't get the opportunity to course correct. You run out of money. All kind of things happen. Uh, so it's better to get it right. I normally, recommend people like try to hire people who have sold products in your kind of stage of the company, and similar to your domain at least. Normally in enterprise software, for example, you can look at people who have sold applications, business applications, like CRM and marketing and HR. That's a different kind of experience than people who have sold infrastructure software. And the infrastructure software will be developer tools, cybersecurity, all kind of things. And then you have a third set of folks who have sold hardware based things, like which are like firewalls and all those kind of things.
Networking. Yeah.
And many times, like you can put people in those three buckets. And for, like in our case, it was clear to me, like the I want people who have experience in the middle bucket, like infrastructure software of some kind. Doesn't have to be like what we DevOps, like harness. It could be something related, but at least infrastructure software kind of things. And if that's there, then I reduce the mistake. And that's what I tell other founders, as well. Like pick among those three categories at least: business applications, infrastructure software, and hardware, and find reps who have experience in those. So then it will reduce the risk of a misfire. And second thing, look for someone who has sold in your price range that you want to sell, and that will also reduce the risk of a misfire. So it's really a misfire reduction. But if you still have a misfire, you course correct. Like what else is the option? You and that the a big part of the founder's job at that stage is to I always call my job is like I'm the fill in the blank. Like if the sales rep misfire or the first sales rep, I'm the sales rep at that point until I fill the do the backfill. So that's the if I hire a head of marketing and that misfires, I'm the fill in the blank in that period. Like on the so that's the job of the founders, to fill the blank, and that's how you go through the course correction.
That's a very quote worthy. The fill in the blank. I think this is more of a thought, and if you have any reaction, that would be great. But I think in the AI world, I think it's kind of changing. I mean, for example, let's just take networking. I mean, yeah, sure, there was devices that you were selling, but now there are like AI first networking, which kind of maybe you don't need devices as much, right? So it's a different skill set. You're selling a software, but maybe people who knew how to sell networking maybe came from the hardware world, for example, right? And I think if you're trying to sell applications, but nowadays the AI applications has a certain level of middleware, so it bleeds a bit into the infrastructure side of the house. So I think it's morphing quite rapidly, and I think
None of these things are ever binary. Like you always have those fuzzy areas that makes it like, are you an application? Like even if you look at a venture fund, like if you have like this partner focuses on business application and this partner focuses on infrastructure software, 20% of the time it will be like there will be a blurry area where like, okay, which bucket we put this thing in. And with AI,
yeah,
that's always the case. And like you have the founders have to use their judgment on that.
yeah. I've learned and heard that you kind of spend your time across product and go to market. I mean, Is there a sweet spot for you, or do you and maybe as an organization scales, have you
Hmm.
been more deliberate about where you want to spend time? Do you want to focus a bit more on product at early stages and then shift to GTM? Like, where is
So,
what
you know,
works?
and I've thought about it a lot, and I figured out, like, the sweet spot also comes down to what you want to do and what your superpower is. It's very important, like, that as a CEO, I also lean into my superpower. Otherwise, like, I'm not taking advantage of where my strength would be to the company. In my case, I am a product guy, like, so I always look at it, if I'm not leaning into the my superpower as a product guy, I'm not, the company is not taking full advantage of me. So when I look at my time as CEO, I like to do one third on product, which is really product. I'm not, it's mostly like product design, product strategy, working with the product teams.
Hmm.
One third with customers. And to me, it's like you can't really do the product work if you're not spending time with customers. So that's I like to go and meet customers and be on Zoom calls with them and just hear from customers and pitch them and all kind of things, like where you're, working, you're also helping your sales teams by talking to these customers, but you're learning, and that's what feeds into the product. And then I call the last one third is the call it operational work. And operational work could be, investors and board and, hiring of teams and HR and all kind of things, like you have to do as CEO. But some for some CEOs, maybe the operational work they can spend 80% of the time and they'll be happy with. If I have to do 80% of my time on operational work, I'll be not be happy. But it's
Yeah.
important, if I spend zero there, that would be a problem too. Like, so it's to me that the healthy balance that works best for me. One third product, one third customers, one third operational,
Mhm.
and then, I can lean into my strengths, and I can operate the business the right way.
That's a great heuristic, and I want to wrap this. I don't know. I don't think it's the first section, but we definitely need to spend some time on AI. So before we go there, I think we have to talk about, and we did a couple of episodes earlier this year around the theme of navigating M&A, because you look at the prices that some of these AI companies are being built and we have seen acquisitions, etc. What was happening? I mean, you guys were getting ready for the IPO. You guys were, I think, I heard that you were on the flight to New York to for possibly, doing the roadshow, etc. And then this happened. So, what was? Walk us a bit through the sort of behind this curtain. I mean, like the thought process. What did you have to navigate?
Sure. So, in AppDynamics case, when many people think, like, we ask me, like, oh, you're running a dual process. A dual process is when you're, running an IPO process and M&A process. But that's not true. We were not running a dual process. We were just going IPO. That was it. Like, we are on the IPO. We're on the IPO roadshow. We're about to price, and Cisco offer just came in. They said, like, hey, the one good thing about when we have your S1 filed, and all the diligence could be done, like, because you're filing S1 for SEC to do diligence, for public investors to do the diligence, for the bankers, for the lawyers. So you have so much diligence is done that, even if you're private, you are almost, everything is public. So for someone to, so, they already did all their diligence because everything was in S1. And they came, a few days before it, and they said, hey, instead of going IPO, this will be the advantages of joining forces, come, being part of Cisco. And, we were about to, I price our IPO probably around $1.5 billion. That's what we were looking at that time. And then, like, how the bankers design, you do $1.5 billion, you get your pop, you trade probably 1.8 2 $1.9 billion, something like that. And Cisco made one offer that was, above our IPO price. We said no. Then they made second offer. We said no. Then they make a third offer, which was, $3.7 billion, and we could keep our cash. So it was close to, $4 billion really. The even though the headline was 3.7. So at that point it was now, okay, what is the right thing for the shareholders involved there? Like, do we go public and remain independent, and build towards that value, or do we sell the company? And, it's a good number, good price, but it was not a easy decision at all. Like, we had, I remember, like, there were, we had these board meetings and calls happening like non-stop, like, for 2 days through to the days when this was happening. Probably like 2 hours of sleep, but to decide these things, with the and then we have like our about 25 of our employees in New York already for the for the ringing the bell on. This was on Thursday. We had the IPO supposed to happen, and people were
Mm,
there.
interesting.
And this was all happening on like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Wednesday evening we announced the that okay, we're gonna take this and come back everyone, and everyone was very sad, and because people had like these are like we had like our first 20 25 employees mostly there. They're all like mostly engineers. They had their suits for the IPO and everything. So but they all came back. And good thing with Cisco, we made the deal that if we close it, can we still go and ring the bell on Nasdaq? And Cisco is a big stock on Nasdaq, so they made that happen. So we still did all of that. But it was a hard.
This came in handy. That's important.
It was a hard decision. Yes, of course, in hindsight, when I look back, we had the best product in the market for observability. Business was growing very well. Yeah, and the market. This was 2017, and the 2017 to 18, 19, 20, 21. Those were like massive boom markets, like with a lot of easy, zero interest rate, etc. So could we have built a much bigger company than what we sold for? We probably could have. A big part of the decision was also some of the board dynamic, investor dynamic. We didn't have a very highly aligned board, which is what I talked about. Like it's very important, for companies. Like those things make a big factor. Like if you want to go and bet for the next 5 years, do you have the right the dynamic to bet on? If you don't have, then do you want to reduce the risk and take on the and take a very strong offer if you have in your hand? So those do become factors as well. There's a market factor. There's a but there, your ability to execute also has those elements into it. Right? So those all played role into it. So when I look at like today, like a lot of valuations are happening, and there is definitely frothiness in the market, right? On what would it be? Many companies will succeed. We'll see a massive value creation, but many companies won't succeed. Like it's you guys know the venture math. Like it's the companies are getting funded at high prices, but how many of them gonna get to a successful outcome? The two, out of, let's say, any problem, there are probably 10 companies, which if there is a good problem, there will be about 10 companies, and out of 10, maybe 20 in some cases, which is too many. I feel that's a part of the fraud. But let's say at least 10 who are getting to a series A. I look at like there's some problem, whatever the problem is, that let's build an AI solution for XYZ. How many companies will get to a series A for that? If you have more than 10, it's probably too many already, which is happening today. But if you're even out of 10, maybe two will succeed in a big way, which is great for the investors. Other two or three will have like moderate to like not really a decent outcome, but and the rest won't go anywhere. So that's we haven't gone through that cycle yet, right? So that will then streamline the prices again of like how companies will be valued.
And I think it's always interesting. One of the key themes you see that happen over and over and over again is once you get to some scale and you are a real company, like in Harness's case, then it's just about how long you're in the market. I mean, the longer you survive, like the more valuable you become, and as you start to get more valuable, then you get other benefits from it. But one of the interesting, and I don't know if this was a lesson you got from Cisco, but to get to this point, you actually have grown. I don't know how meaningful the revenue is from M&A, but you've added a lot of capabilities from a product perspective through M&A. And I'm curious with Harness, what changed in that strategy? Why'd you decide to go more aggressively down the M&A path? And as speaking of valuations, how do you kind of think about valuations when you do go buy these companies?
Yeah, so yes, we Harness has been very acquisitive. We have picked a lot of companies, but these are all small companies mostly. Some are as small as like 2 people, 3 people, 4 people. Some are is like a bit bigger, but majority of them are less than 25 people that we picked. And we normally look at like good product and good talent and good people coming in. Our goal at Harness is we want to be the end-to-end platform for everything that happens in the software delivery tool chain. That's everything after code. So all kind of testing, all kind of deployment activity, all kind of security activity, all kind of optimization activities. And these are about, like, historically these have been like 30 different kind of startups in the to solve these things. And we are bringing like a one consolidated platform that does all of these things well. But it does all of these things very well is very key. Like, so we are designing our platform that is a platform for everything that happens after coding, but it's a platform of best of breed capabilities for all of them, whether it's like CI or CD or feature flags or chaos engineering or cloud cost management, AI SRE, security testing. These are all, we call them modules in our platform, but they're all designed to be best of breed to do that. And the way we organizationally structured ourselves is what I call like a startups within a startup concept. The Harness is a broader startup, and we have these all of these. We have 16 modules now. We started with one product or one module, a continuous delivery. Now we have 16 in our platform, and these are all best of breed. And our customers can buy any one of them. They're all part of one platform, but they can pick like, okay, I only want to turn on these two modules or these three modules or these five modules, and we are charging them, and we are earning our business by proving that they're best of breed. For each one of them will compete against the best of breed kind of startups in there. So now our acquisition strategy is built on how do we get to a best of breed module on something. And what we've realized is it takes about 2 years. If you start, okay, we say we want to build a feature flags or artifact registry or some, or like the use cases in the software delivery tool chain, or security testing for static code security scanning. To build something best of breed, it takes 2 years. Like, you ship something, then you kind of, by the time you can go and sell into the into one of the largest banks in the world, or like a largest tech company in the world or something like that, can we short circuit that 2 years down to something? Can we short circuit it to 6 months? Can we short circuit it to a year? Can we short circuit it to 3 months? And our entire acquisition strategy is built on that concept. So, like, can we pick the right product, the right team? Many times it's like the right person, like maybe one or two people who have spent like 3 years, 5 years, 7 years on that particular problem, in depth. Now, can we bring them, and they can build inside Harness? And a big part of, like, what also makes it very attractive for these people to do inside Harness is our startup within startups culture. And our, like, they can run their startup inside Harness. So it's one integrated platform. In 6 months we rewrite the code, so it's all one user experience for the user, one thing. But it's running as or they kind of own and run their startup, their revenue, their retention. We have the large sales force that can help them, like, the customer base. So it becomes like they're operating inside it. So that's been our strategy, and that allows us to scale so fast, like that, from, like, one really good product to 16 in the last 4 or 5 years, which are all can compete with the best of breed startups, and in their areas, has been through our this kind of acceleration through acquisition strategy.
It's super super interesting topic, and I know we could spend a lot more time. You just don't see that many companies at your scale and that are getting to your scale have the sort of success that you've seen with this M&A strategy. But I think the core takeaway is it has to be a perfect fit as part of a broader product roadmap strategy. But then also there's a cultural piece of it and all the other stuff you talked about that allow that person or company to be successful internally. But just a really fascinating way to think about building companies, and we've not seen it as much since the days of Cisco, and some of those companies did it well. So interesting to see them bring that strategy back successfully. We're about halfway through the podcast, and it wouldn't be a podcast in 2025 if we didn't talk about AI. So maybe to just switch gears there. I'd love to just start talking about the use of AI in the SDLC as a whole. And really, from your perspective, one of the things that I was curious about was, as you sold to the enterprise, like, what's changing when it comes to AI and the SDLC? Are you? I mean, obviously, we're hearing about startups building faster, and with Cursor and all this stuff. Are you seeing the same sort of evolution happening in the enterprise? Are you seeing them turning more to build versus buy because they can build faster? What are the observations you're seeing when it comes to the AI SDLC?
And maybe I'll just add to what Vic said. Do you agree with MIT's 95% pilots are failing? I guess.
Okay, so there are few questions. Yes, let me give my point of view on each one of those. One is like what we are seeing in enterprise on the SDLC, the software development lifecycle. AI for coding is everywhere. Every enterprise, whether it's a startup or an enterprise, everyone has it. Everyone is using it in some one shape or form, and everyone is getting coding productivity increase. It's at this point the coding productivity increase is definitely happening. Some people have 10% increase, some has 20% increase, some has 40% increase, some has 3x increase too. Uh, you know, but the part that people miss out is code is not the finished product. A lot of times people assume that as the finished product of software engineering is code. That from when you code is the raw material that's like kind of half finished material that's coming into an assembly line that has like 30, 40 different things you have to do before it becomes a finished product. So if you produce more code and the assembly line cannot keep up with, it has a certain thing pace at which it can operate, more code doesn't mean anything. So there was actually this Google has this research group called DORA, which is development operations research analysis, something like that. They published this data this summer that engineering teams that are using coding assistants get 25% increase in code volume, very real, but they got 1.5% decrease in throughput. Throughput as in what shipped to the end consumer. And they got 7.5% decrease in the delivery stability. Stability is quality, resiliency, security, vulnerabilities, etc. And that is the reality in most places. Like the code is going up, but people haven't figured out okay, does more code mean more output in the real output to your consumers. So that's the step two that has to happen in enterprises. And we are seeing a lot of tailwind with that, because now people are realizing, like, I need to go and modernize the downstream after the code, and everything that happens after code has to be done. Can I use AI for it? Can I use automation for that? And that's where at Harness we have evolved pretty heavily into AI agents as our primary way of people can do all of those tasks. DevOps, testing, FinOps, security, all the tasks that we are building the most sophisticated AI agents to take care of everything that happens after coding. So to answer your question on the AI in SDLC, AI in SDLC is real, but people have only done the step one, which is AI for coding. People have not done the step two, is how do I ship that code? And the difference in step one and step two is the step one, you can afford to have a inaccuracy. Like code doesn't have to be 100% accurate. It's no AI coding can produce a 100% accurate code right now. And even when humans were writing, they were not also writing 100% accurate code. AI has probably the same amount of bugs and vulnerabilities that the humans would do. The difference is, when humans were writing, they understood the code. When AI is writing, sometimes you don't understand the code because so much code comes out, and it's like just no one has the time and energy to try to understand all of that. But when you're shipping something to production, you can't afford to have those inaccuracies. So that becomes like, how do you remove all the inaccuracies there? Like if you have an app that serves 100 million consumers, one line of bug can bring things down. Like the CrowdStrike outage last year was really one line of bug. It's not like the bug is very complicated or something. Like but if you don't have the right testing and the right discipline of you ship it to 0.1% of your users and validate it and then ship it to more, and all the processes around it, the risk is very high. So that's where the next part of AI in SDLC has to be. Like also, like, one of the things that people don't realize is the time spent in coding versus everything after coding is is only about 30% of the time goes in coding. 70% of the time goes in all other kind of things. And so if you optimize coding, which is great, you got to optimize other parts to get full value. So that's that to me the first part of it. The second question there was like build versus buy of SaaS applications, and Satya said like SaaS, people won't buy SaaS anymore because they can build their own SaaS. I don't buy into that at all. I think that doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it's, yes, as an enterprise, okay, maybe you can build your CRM on your own better than or faster than you could before because of AI. But someone selling CRM can also do better faster than before using AI. So would you really have an advantage over a dedicated focused vendor with a lot of expertise and a lot of thousands and thousands of customers they can learn from to build a great CRM for you or a great HR system for you versus building on your own? This thing of like, oh, now they have AI to build code, so they can just build their own CRM and HR and all kind of things. I don't think so.
I mean, clearly we saw it with Klarna, and I think ultimately, it comes down to a question of TCO at the end of the day, right? Like, it's not just writing the code, it's not just shipping the code, then it's maintaining and all the other stuff that comes with it.
And the if you are getting AI productivity gain, the vendors are also getting the AI productivity gain. So are you really going to be more effective than them? But there's a lot of domain expertise, and that's not your core business. So why would you should not? And that's been the trend in the industry. Like, people used to build their own things. The people used to build their own HR and accounting and sales and all, and then they realize this doesn't make sense. They need to buy from vendors. And that's what I don't think that's going to change. We are seeing that in developer tools was a big problem area, that people are building their own developer tools most of the time. We are seeing that changing. People buy developer tools because it's now because it's much better quality. Developer tools will come from vendors because they have dedicated focus and teams working on those versus what you will build on your own. So I doubt that will change.
I have a thought here. I mean, like we have seen cycles. This is my 10th year doing this. Of cycles of disaggregation and aggregation, right? Of solutions. And I think in today's context of AI native companies, I think to your point about 10 different companies doing the same thing, maybe it's disaggregated like point solutions, right? Maybe they will aggregate. Maybe there'll be a fuller stack that comes through.
I think we will see aggregation. And so I think right now it's like each of the areas, like say there's like some one use case, and there are like 10 new AI startups trying to solve that use case. There's another use case that's another 10 startups, another use case, another 10 startups. So in some of these use cases, some startups will win, rest won't. Like that's just normally the case. Like 2 out of 10 will succeed, others won't. It's just competitive. And but even after you succeed in that use case one, is that enough? Or you got to aggregate with use case two and use case three and use case four, use case five to have some kind of a platform. That is likely going to happen, but maybe that comes later, or maybe
Yeah.
that platforms will pick up some of those use cases and bring them in.
Maybe a follow up to my earlier statement would be like if you think about the model companies, they're good at building code, for example, but they're also offering code review, and then there are third parties that offer code review, right? There's a school of thought, hey, you want a third party to sort of say that this code from this model company is actually a good code. But there's also a school of thought that the enterprises may just want to, hey, I want a single neck to choke. Let's just use one. I mean, we have seen that happen. Do you think there's an aspect of that could apply to SDLC? I mean, where you're operating, or you think you guys are safe?
No one is safe. No one thinks from the lens of they are safe as a they are making a mistake, or you always have to be paranoid about that. I never consider like we are ever safe of from anything, like uh, but I look at yes, there is AI for coding, and they have the advantage of they are mostly the LLM providers, so they and LLMs are do majority of that work in there, and so heavy lifting is happening inside the LLM model providers itself. And then let's say we are doing there's AI for things that are happening after coding, which is testing, deployment, security, etc. Would can they come into it? Yeah, some of them would, but there's a unique difference that when a lot of things that you're doing, AI is the layer that's setting up a lot of the automation. That the core strength is the automation, because you're not. It's like how do you automatically do something, and the AI is driving that automation and setting up that automation, and that becomes the core differentiator, not just the AI models. Right? So use AI models to create the automation, set up the automation, but someone has to operate the plumbing of the automation, which is what which like companies like Harness, we own the automation and then they are now AI layer to set up that automation, and we can learn from the context from the coding providers, and we can feed our context that we have. We have the context of all deployments and production infrastructure and security issues and incidents and prior test failures and governance policies. All of that is very different set of context that we have. So now we can even feed that, and we are feeding through our MCPs into the IDs to the coding agents. We can also leverage some from the coding agents. So there is the coexistence that going to happen. There's another interesting analogy that I had someone say, and I was like, oh, that makes sense of how to think about this. Like this, there was this conversation happening on like what one AI or two AI will take over everything. So how do we make sure like manage the risk in the world? Like just like, and the analogy was like, so the way you have accountants and you have auditors, you have AI will help accountants, you will have AI that will help auditors, and you need both separately. Otherwise, like the world is you can't say okay, there's AI for accounting and that do everything. The checks and balances in the world that has happened pre AI will happen in post AI as well. Like that you need two AIs, and in SDLC, I tell people normally that I mostly I would imagine the world that most companies are two AIs. One AI is to go and build the software. Second AI is make sure the software works. And that you need that balance. We are at Harness, we are committed to be the best AI in the world for making sure the software works. And yes, do the people who are building AI for build the software, will they encroach a bit in our space? Probably they will a bit, but we'll have a lot of advantages. Would we encroach in their space a bit? We probably will do as well, and we'll have our advantages when we do that too.
Jyoti, one of the things you said in there was talking about context, and ultimately, I think context will be critical to actually, making whatever solution you build the best solutions. Like just in the example that you gave, auditor versus accounting, like how you feed the model and what you feed into the model matters. And I'm curious, as you guys have built, continued to build your AI functionality and your AI product. To me, I don't think context is actually. I think there are engineering problems. I shouldn't say there are no engineering problems, but I think there's equally a product problem to actually get the context from people, extracted from the enterprises. And I'm curious, how did you guys go about solving that problem? What were the challenges that you ran into in the early days of getting the right context, and what are the lessons that you've gotten to actually making it work to be able to get the right outputs?
Yeah, I think it's really understanding what a particular company's situation is. That's the core of the context. Like the situation could be, how do their teams operate? How, what security policies they have, what compliance policies they have, what their production architecture look like, what testing standards do they have, like, what consumer satisfaction bars they have. Like, so that to me is what we call it as TLC knowledge graph of understanding all of that. And now that's is what's feeding into the AI to do, like, okay, now create me a deployment pipeline, just set up the right testing for me, right? Set up the right security policies for me. They're all coming from understanding an enterprise's a situation, which is what you can call the context that you're passing to the AI. So now how do we capture that, that how do we know an enterprise situation? So in our case, of course, the biggest advantage we have is, like, these enterprises are using us already even before that, for, like, deployments across for all their developers. So, like, we have, say, a PayPal with, like, 11,000 developers. Everything is already happening through us, so we already know the contact. Or like a Citibank with 20,000 developers, or a United Airlines with 8 9,000 developers. These companies are using our platform for their builds, their deployments, their, all kind of things. So we already have all of that information in our in our database for them. We are not sharing it across the customers, but we know it for them, like how United Airlines operate. So now our AI can use all the information to suggest all the new things they want to do, to set up new pipelines or to set up new tests or new security based on that. So that's like one part of it. The second is, we are opening it with, like, through a bi-directional MCP. Like, these customers can feed us the context and more information, like, hey, there is my documentation, or here's are my policies, and we feed it, we absorb it through their MCPs. Or we go and read into their docs and their specs and things, like, so that we can consume. So that's the other way to bring in, like, where, we already have information, or we are consuming from the other sources they have, where information is there.
Hmm. I mean, a lot to sort of digest there, but I think this nicely fits into this concept of overarching theme of moats in AI, right? I mean, if you look at it bottom up or top down, I mean, top down is the UI UX layer, and some things that I think about, like, and then you have the data velocity that's coming into you, or maybe the model logic, whether you created it or you sort of fine tuned it. Do you agree with these, or do you think that there are new modes that are shaping up? Your perspectives, please.
Yeah, I agree with that. But there is the other note I would add to that is the engineering, the product engineering work, because it takes time. Like, if you are even context engineering, like, and capturing all the context and saving it in the, it's when you are talking to AI, you're not gonna be able to pass like a million lines of context most of the time. So how do you synthesize that information into something that an AI can consume and still be accurate about it? And that is, there's a lot of engineering works, like, of, like, how do you make it consumable for if you have too much information, it doesn't work for AI unless you can make it useful for, for any kind of AI. So how do you do that right? How do you do the right integrations around it? How you break the task into smaller agents, so you can pass them the right context on the agents. If you go to one agent and say, do me this task, you can't pass enough context to that in any way. It will become very inaccurate at that point. Like, all the models you will see like become very, very inaccurate everywhere. So now it's like, how do you take the task, break into 10 smaller tasks, and then you take it into another 10, maybe, maybe 100 tasks overall, and then you're passing the right information and the right context for each of those. And all of that needs to be engineered for your domain. Like your domain specific agents you have to build, for each of the different tasks. Like in our case, like we'll have agents for this is the agent for deploying on Lambda. This is the agent for deploying a verifying, a Lambda deployment from Datadog. So these are just small level agents, right? But now when you go to our like a high level agent and say, build me a pipeline that takes my code and automatically deploys with my bank's governance standards, that will require 50 different custom built agents to do that job. So that is becomes a moat at some point, because we're building all of those, which are like domain specific highly tuned agents who have the right context and information that will pass it to it, and our ability to capture and synthesize and store that context and information. That becomes a big moat. Like, it's like, yes, someone can do it, but it will take them, you know years to catch up on it. And that's what the we keep building moat on it. And every industry will have the same thing, like, whether it's CRM or marketing, or not just like what we are doing in DevOps, in other areas too.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think in general, I mean, this is almost like a microcosm of verticalization, but in every category, it's going to be about verticalization. How deep can you go? Because the model guys have they're touching a lot of different types of customers, a lot of different use cases. There's just no way they can handle everything. Maybe speaking of the model layer and being conscious of time here, Jyoti, can you just give us your view on like just the future of enterprise AI? Like, what are you most excited about? Where do you think the biggest disruptions will be coming from? And I know obviously you have your own startup lab. So, what are the areas that you're excited about? Where do you think the biggest opportunity will come from?
I, I I'm strong believer in, like, the vertical specific AI as the lot of opportunity in the startup line. If you can look at the as from a startup investor perspective, right? You have the underlying model infrastructure layer. That is there. There's, like, and but it will be dominated by the few big players. Like, yes, there will be some opportunities on the on different gaps there, all that. Then you have like the sort of the tools around people to do things on those, and those tools will some become part of the model infrastructure, some would not, like, anywhere from like vector databases and things like that. And then you have the vertical specific applications. Could be DevOps, which is kind of a vertical specific application. Could be marketing, could be sales, could be accounting, could be industrial design, could be UI design, all kind of things. I really think that's where a lot of the opportunities are. Like, almost every vertical specific thing has to be rethought, and some of them, maybe the existing players will do such a great job that they will completely rethink and win. Some of them, the new players will win. Some of them, maybe the convergence will happen, that the existing player will pick up the new player, and that's how they get to it. But all of these vertical specific workflows and use cases and all will be redefined through heavy use of domain specific AI. And that's where I was going to. I don't buy that, oh, we don't even need those anymore, because every enterprise can build their own on vertical specific expert solutions. I don't think that's going to happen, and that they should not do it, and the ROI doesn't make sense that they for them to do it.
Got it.
Well, I was just processing all of that. I think there's a lot of content, and we're going to summarize all of this in notes for our audience. But I think we are at the
AI.
at the
Maybe I don't know.
we are at the tail end of the session, and we gotta end it with the key question that I think I'm sure every founder who wants to emulate what you have built multiple times be keen to hear. How do you decompress? How do you sort of take the foot off the pedal and come back to the war room, rejuvenated? What's are there like a few rituals, or I mean, we have heard different kind of answers over the last several episodes, but curious your thoughts.
Yeah. I don't have any kind of a crazy of this, like, I wake up at 5 a.m. and do this thing. There's nothing like that. To me, it's like, get good sleep, prioritize what you want to do, manage time well. And to me, the biggest is compression is spending time with family. play with your kids. That does decompress you and makes it more grounded and real. That's what we do.
Mm.
The other part I look at is also you also want some time to think. And the probably the and I know other people have do that also, but to me it's my biggest thinking time is a long shower. I always take a 30-minute shower, because that's to me is when there's no distraction, there's no phone, there's nothing, you are in that noise, and that's almost all my day has to start with that. If I don't, then I feel all disoriented during the whole day, because if I haven't spent that 30 minutes in the but that's my people, I'm going to meditate. It's maybe that's considered a meditation, but that's my that's really all.
I got to lob this one in. What do you think of this 996, or I've even heard 007?
Yeah,
Midnight to midnight,
007.
7 days.
It's just fancy names for it. Yes, startups people work hard. When I was doing FD, the early time of it probably was no different than that. But you just adjust for it. I don't believe in requiring people that you have to come to office 996 or something like that. It's people do and this was much before COVID, when people will always go to office. But even then, everyone has a different cadence of things. Maybe you go home and you do eat your dinner and spend some time, and then in the early days of AppDynamics, for example, I was writing a lot of code. I probably wrote the at least one third of the code, maybe even more for the V1 of the product. We were 4 or 5 engineers, so yes, you have to write a lot of stuff. But to me, it's the day was mostly running as CEO and all kind of things. And in the night, I will get home, and after 9, almost 9 to 2 a.m. Will be the coding time, and and so some of the other folks will be on the call, and
Wow.
you're on your chat, and just doing that. So it's a different, but you do startup world always, you work hard. It's normal. What I'm not a fan of, oh, this is the schedule you have to be in. That seems to me factory workers kind of a concept. People are motivated in startup. If someone is joining a small startup, 5%, 10%, they know it's not a 9 to 5 job, and they don't expect it. So people are already in there, but you
Mm.
want people to manage their time and how they do it. That's what I believe in. These are smart people. They know they're joining a startup for the hustle of the early stage, to the big wins that will can come with the equity on that. They coming in, but how they manage their time, I like to treat them as
Adults.
adults who can figure out how to manage them.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I got to end off by saying thanks, Jyoti, for taking the time, and I appreciate you sort of sharing wonderful nuggets. I mean, even I'm invigorated with some of the thoughts, and I got to reflect on that. But we are at Geodesic happy to be shareholders in Harness as well. So thank you, and I think it's going to be a great episode for everybody. Thanks again.
This hour flew by, Jyoti.
Yeah.
Hey, take care, guys.
All right, thanks.
Thanks again for joining the Unpack podcast. Before we wrap up, I want to thank our partners at Stifel Bank. From general banking to venture debt, they have been incredible partners to my portfolio. Please remember to subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.